All right, Darwin, take it away, my friend.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining today. Welcome to KQL Kung Fu, finding the needle in the haystack in your Azure environment. Today, I'm joined by Tyler Robinson, and I am Darwin Salazar. We'll be your host for the day, and we'll be taking you from zero to hero with Kusto Query Language and showing you how to extract deep insights from your Azure environment using Azure Resource Graph, and also how to write threat detection rules in Microsoft Sentinel. This session will be recorded and uploaded to the Security Weekly archives, so you could go back and replay it and follow along with some of the queries that we go ahead and demo here on this session. And also, I did want to mention we are doing a giveaway for a $100 gift card for Hacker Warehouse. To win this giveaway, you'll have to answer a fun trivia question that we've included at the end, and you'll have to post your answer to the Discord channel. So you have to do a quick intro. It's pretty mandatory, right? My name is Darwin Salazar. I actually interned at Security Weekly. Some of the best times of my life hanging out in the studio with Paul, Johnny, Sam, and the rest of the crew. Today, I'm a threat detection engineer for cloud at Datadog, and in my past life, I did IoT security for medical devices and other connected devices. You can see my blog here, darwinsec.com, and also my Twitter. Feel free to follow me. And here are just some of the accolades that I've racked up over my career. Hand it off to you, Tyler.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you everybody for coming today. Super excited to walk through this. Obviously, Darwin here is the foremost expert on this KQL stuff, so I'm going to be providing some banter, a few tips and tricks, as well as the offensive and attacker viewpoint for this presentation. So who am I? My name is Tyler Robinson. I've been kind of doing the hacking and sysadmin and ops for a little over 25 years now. I spent a lot of time breaking into things for red teams, for corporations, do a lot of physicals, ICS, some training, do some black hat training, as well as private training for government entities. Speak and do a lot of conferences, so if you're very interested in some of the topics you hear today, go back and look at some of the videos we've put out. Lots of good webinars that we've done in the past, as well as some coming up in the near future, as well as the Security Weekly podcast network. There's several shows I'm on there. I fill in quite a bit on Business Security Weekly, Enterprise Security Weekly, regular co-host on Palo Security Weekly. So go check out the network if you're interested in security and keeping up on topics and very relevant technical people.
Thank you, Tyler. So moving along, this is just a quick overview of what we'll be touching on and going over today. Obviously, the talk is called KQL Kung Fu, but we'll also be going over what services are compatible with KQL and what you can accomplish with KQL and those services. We'll mostly be focusing on Azure Resource Graph and Microsoft Sentinel, and then we'll also be dissecting the KQL syntax and workflow to go ahead and build out some of those queries. And we'll end it off with just looking at a very high value, high impact threat detection rule that Tyler and I picked out for you guys. So without further ado, what the heck is KQL? What is Kusto Query Language? It's a Microsoft proprietary query language used to search across logs, databases, and tables. It's compatible with Azure Log Analytics, Sentinel, Azure Resource Graph, Azure Data Explorer, Azure Monitor App, Insights, probably several more services that I may have forgotten, but as a security practitioner, these are the ones that you should be focused on. KQL, Kusto Query Language, is actually named after Jack Kusto, who was a deep sea exploration pioneer, actually. And if you apply what he did to our world today, like a very digitized environment and all of the log data that a large enterprise would be collecting today, you could think of all of the logs that we collect as the deep ocean, the deep sea. And so KQL is a very good tool to help you navigate and dive into and extract insights from that deep sea, but also help you find that needle in a haystack when you're thinking about like threat hunting or threat detection.
I mean, since it's the cloud, right? Like that kind of is oxymoronic that it's named after a deep sea ocean diver, and Azure is really focused on a lot of the stuff in the cloud. But the cloud is very important. We're just starting to get a handle on getting all the logs and ingestion for our on-prem environments and really getting a good visibility and asset management, I would say, mindset for on-prem. Now we've got the cloud, everybody's kind of switched to the cloud and they've migrated stuff there. We've got SaaS applications, and then they've migrated back out and we're in this hybrid environment. So this is very, very timely as far as getting a handle on where attackers are focusing, which is SaaS applications and cloud, as well as bringing all of the knowledge that you have from what you've done in SIEMs and on-prem logging and visibility out to something that's a little bit more ostensible and scalable. And we'll provide, you'll see how well this actually scales, not just to security and SOC analysts, but also to DevOps, to internal builders, sysadmins, anybody that's managing, and I would even go as far as asset management with inside of an organization. This is very powerful and provides insight and visibility into areas that are often overlooked and not being done by many corporations.
Yeah, you make some great points there, Tyler. And so to the point that you made about asset management, we have Azure Resource Graph. It's an extremely powerful tool and service that actually powers the Azure portal search bar. So whenever you're looking for a resource within the Azure portal, so you're looking for key vaults, Azure Resource Graph is working with Azure Resource Manager to go ahead and display all of the key vaults within your environment. It can help out with resource exploration and asset management, and we'll show you just how when we pop over to the Azure portal. The way that it works, it interacts directly with the ARM API to maintain a updated database of resources, the resource status, and any changes made to that resource. So it's extremely powerful in that sense. And it's also compatible with most resource APIs. So for example, Microsoft Container Registry, Microsoft Network, Microsoft Insights, and a ton of others. And then they also have this feature, which is currently in preview mode, where you actually can enable resource change tracking. And we'll show you a bit of that manually as well in a bit. Next, this is one thing that truly impressed me, is that you can use the Azure Resource Graph API with KQL, but also Azure CLI, PowerShell, .NET, Java, and Golang. So it's highly compatible, and I bet you can think of some pretty cool use cases for some applications or custom scripts to go ahead and extract these insights about your resources in Azure. Next, it also supports querying across multiple subscriptions. So if you're looking for non-compliant assets, let's say, across your entire environment, you just write up a query and plug it into Azure Resource Graph, and it'll dump out, say, all of your non-compliant resources across all subscriptions. So you don't have to run those queries once for each subscription.
And this is very useful for things like production and dev environments with inside of different tenancies, where these multiple subscriptions, many organizations run lots and lots of subscriptions, and so getting a single, we'll call it the single pane of glass to kind of hit the industry buzzword for the day, but that single subscription or that single visibility point into those multiple subscriptions where you have branches and you can do queries that are very specific, like what are all the non-compliant devices with inside of production versus DevOps? What are the differences in disparate systems that we are trying to identify that may be vulnerable across all of our resources? So that multiple subscription query provides great insight and visibility, not only to like the DevOps and the SysOps guys, but also to the SOC and the people looking for security vulnerabilities or identifying things that might be at risk. You have a couple very large vulnerabilities that were dropped just recently. How can you query across all of your subscriptions very quickly to identify what those risks are and start to begin the mitigation?
Yep, yeah, and we'll be diving into the Azure Resource Graph to show you some of those use cases. Again, it's an extremely powerful tool, and it kind of blows my mind how few people know about it. from being previously on engagements when I was a consultant doing Azure security. It has a ton of usability and a ton of use cases, especially for large enterprises and those that are struggling with inventory and asset management. But also from an attacker perspective, Azure Resource Graph is a pretty powerful tool as well, because it only requires the reader role to the subscription or the resources that you'd like to query. And so we usually like to think that reader role is a pretty low privileged role. All they can do is read. They can't make any modifications, delete anything, or create new accounts. But if you're thinking about the amount of power and visibility that Azure Resource Graph gives you to an Azure environment, it's pretty scary that an attacker could jump in there just with reader role and begin footprinting your environment and seeing what resources may be non-compliant, which resources have public IP addresses, which resources belong to a production environment. And so with that, I'll jump over. Yep.
That reader role is one that you also have to consider the dangers of the subscriptions and applications that end up with reader role with inside of your environment, and how you allow users to enroll and gain those role-based privileges for that reader role, because a malicious application or an attacker using a malicious application, again, like Darwin was saying, you can fingerprint an entire organization. I want to look for everything that has a public IP address that also is vulnerable to the specific application that I can query right within inside of the resource graph. And so you get huge insights into the Azure environment, not only on a single subscription, but multiple subscriptions. So as an attacker, this lends itself to a very low footprint, especially on the on-prem environment, again, where we have good visibility, we've got good heuristics, our SIM is highly tuned. When I can start to query all this just from a reader role in an Azure subscription, now we're talking about something that you may not have the visibility into, and that provides almost as much benefit, if not more, insight into the applications and the security, the different roles and people doing things in a very quick fashion that doesn't leave a ton behind if you're not looking for it.
Yep, and so as you had just mentioned, Tyler, right? You could look and identify which resources have like public IP addresses, for example, or which resources are non-compliant or have open security recommendations for them. So here, for example, you have like a regulatory compliance assessment state, and you can dump out the different resources that are non-compliant. And as an attacker, that's extremely attractive, because obviously you want to target the systems with lower barriers of entry. I believe there were also some pre-canned queries here that has the count of operating system updates done over the past 7 days, and you could list like out the version of which operating systems and what version they're running, which is pretty again, it's deep insights that if you're a defender, you want to make sure that all of your systems are patched and up to date. You can leverage Azure Resource Graph to do just that, but as an attacker, you can also leverage it to pinpoint what systems you'd like to attack. And so these are all pre-canned queries that you could go in and start playing with today. Microsoft actually like adds some pretty good commentary defining like what the query does. And then here you get the raw query that you could play around with, you could massage it, you could fine tune it to your liking. But here they have a ton of queries. Another place where I wanted to bring your attention to is obviously they also have like some of the advanced queries we won't dive into, but they have these tables here on the side, which is a key focus area, because this is where you're actually grabbing your insights from. These are the tables that you're querying when you're creating your Azure Resource Graph query. And so here, I just clicked on this table for Microsoft.resources /changes. And what I want to do is get an output of all of the changes that have occurred on my Azure resources within my environment. And so as you can see here, it dumps a ton of data, a ton of different events. And so what I'm really focused on here is if I open the details here and I look at the raw JSON, this is all JSON formatted. I want to see what type of change was performed on this resource. And so what it seems here is the resource type is Microsoft.compute disk. So it seems that they had just updated the disk on this virtual machine. Now, this may not be as impressive or as indicative, say, of a compromise or of anomalous activity, but say I'm looking for now deletes where a resource has been deleted, or yeah, essentially just where a resource has been deleted. I could do where type equals, and this is looking for an exact match on any resources, and it'll be where type contains actually delete. Interesting. The live demo gods always yeah. One second.
And this is a great point where when you start to look at how powerful this language is and how simple it is to not only read, but very quickly drill down and programmatically get the information you're after across a very large set of data. This is something, again, when you start to look at SIMs or you look at individual Splunk queries, elk stack, you know, with Kibana and your Elasticsearch, like all of those things become very unique to how you're doing the queries. Same here. We have KQL, which is very easy to read and very easy to get ostensible with. But not only that, there's a ton of pre-canned stuff. And as you'll see when we're looking at this delete, we can quickly start to do things like threat hunting, where we're looking for things like deleting a disk or maybe data exfiltration. And we're going to get into some of the nuances of what the KQL language looks like, some good threat hunts that you can do to leverage these pieces of information, and then how fast you can begin to look for heuristics, anomalous behavior using counts and averages, and all the nuance pieces. This is within one hour you can get proficient enough to evaluate all of your subscriptions and identify things that may be interesting, and you can begin to tune those. So this is one of those languages that doesn't take you, an entire year to get up to speed just to write your first dashboard and get some small insights into a very specific piece of data that you were maybe able to ingest. And if you can continue to afford to ingest that data for some of the licensing costs and ingestion costs, this is one that has a ton of free stuff that comes in and out of the box is available to query right now.
Yeah, you make a very great point, Tyler, in the sense it doesn't take you long to get up and running with KQL. And so, for example, I don't come from a programming background or a comp sci background, and it was fairly easy for me to get caught up to speed with KQL and Sentinel and how to use it on Azure Resource Graph as well. So at most, I think it would take you like a week to get real good with your KQL Kung Fu and actually start providing value to your organization or your enterprise with these services that we're showing today. So here what you can see is I'm looking for any resource changes that were deletes. And so here you can see the change type within the properties. This is the raw data from the actual event. And you can see that someone deleted an log analytics workspace, which if someone deletes your log analytics workspace, there should be alarms ringing off everywhere, because that probably means that most of your logs are also gone. So
yeah, very high fidelity, high alert that you should probably look at and take care of. And again, you can see that with less than basically 2 lines of code, you've quickly identified things that you need to go evaluate in a space for logs and resources that you probably are not looking into outside of automated tooling.
Yep, and another key thing to point out is that you don't need to enable anything to have access to Azure Resource Graph. It's already, like when you spin up your Azure environment, Azure Resource Graph is already there by default and communicating with Azure Resource Manager Fabric and collecting all of these details, all of the changes, the resource status. And so it's not like a traditional SIM and monitoring type of tool where you have to enable the log, say for activity logs. You don't have to go and enable it to begin collecting and monitoring these logs. It's already there, running in the background 24/7. So again, it's a free service. It powers the Azure portal search bar. It's extremely powerful, and you should be using it.
I mean, if you didn't get hooked right there, the free, and I think you have a slide that goes over a good portion of all of the free resources available. This right here for any organization, especially using Azure or a hybrid environment where you have Azure and on-prem stuff, like this should be a no-brainer because of the costs of the ingestion that other products take, or the level of work it takes to get data ingested. This is available, it's there, it's already ingesting, and the backend database is ready to go and be queried right now.
Exactly. So as you can see, I'm just running a quick search for all of my Azure resources across all subscriptions. And the one thing that I wanted to point out, obviously it'll show you like what resource type it is, what subscription it belongs to. But one thing that I really like from an attacker perspective is it presents to you the resource tag. So it'll give you like the environment and production, which most organizations do break up and do label their resources with this format and this type of labeling. But you could also, if it's a streaming company, it may have labels that are indicative of which application this resource or this key vault or this storage bucket is actually supporting. So again,
or you mean something sensitive like PCI or
oh yeah.
PR?
Yeah, that's another good one. Every time someone says PCI, I have to take it, like have a drink. But I'm technically on the clock, so I can't like drink on the clock. But yeah, you can identify which resources are fall under the GDPR audit scope and things of that nature. And so from that sense, it's also extremely valuable. Jumping back over to the slides, 1 second here.
And I think that's a great point. Like, even though there is a ton here, the data is already here. It's already going and being maintained. So from a defensive standpoint, like you need to be using this to identify these, get that visibility, because if you don't, the attackers will. So this has benefits on both sides for, you know, understanding what your assets actually are, how many things have labels, maybe creating some of those labels that are very specific for sensitive units within inside of your company. Beginning to leverage the tools you have very, very quickly provides that insight and visibility from the defensive side to quickly react, quickly build queries, have that insight that you otherwise don't, because the attackers, I guarantee, are leveraging these types of attacks, this information that is already available and there. So if you're not using it, that's just a disadvantage from the defensive side.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you mentioned there, Tyler, really stands out to me is like, if you're not using it, then an attacker may end up using it against you. So it allows you to have, it's like you have all of your resources in the palm of your hand, and using Kql to query for your resources with Azure Resource Graph is an extremely valuable type of skill to have in your tool set as a security team and also as a security practitioner. Now, switching pace a little bit, we're going to talk a bit about Sentinel, which is Microsoft's cloud-native SIEM and SOAR solution. So it has all of the bells and whistles that a traditional SIEM has in terms of like you could write and deploy threat detection rules. It has workbooks for visualization of your logs and network flow. It also has like threat hunting queries and things of that nature. But also when paired with Azure Logic apps, you can create some pretty cool playbooks that can auto-remediate a resource, but can also assign a incident ticket to an analyst, and it can also conduct event enrichment for an incident or an alert. The underlying solution that powers Sentinel is log analytics. It is essentially ingest, that's where all the logs are sent and collected and stored. Without log analytics workspace, you can't have Sentinel. And so here are some of those free log sources that Tyler was mentioning that Microsoft allows you to ingest free of charge. And so this includes the Azure activity logs, which are your control plane logs. They also allow free ingestion of Microsoft Defender for Cloud, of security alerts, endpoint, and Microsoft Defender for identity alerts.
That right there, that's another no-brainer reason that you should have this. Like Microsoft Defender right now, where they've integrated a lot of the ATD and ATP heuristics, that's all rolled into Defender. Defender's on Windows 10 by default. With the right subscription, you're getting all of the advanced features and telemetry that Microsoft is building right within inside of this and sending these logs in. So you should have no excuse to not have a good EDR platform within inside of your environment if you have some of these free data sources available to you. So being able to ingest these, have a SIM that's bringing this in without having to pay a cost for the endpoint licensing. You're just worrying about your Azure subscription and the Sentinel. Like that right there has got to be a massive return on investment for whatever spend you have to get up to speed and learn the KQL and some of the graphing and visualization pieces. This is one of the best pieces about this, is that Microsoft has integrated all this together so everything works, plays, and understands together without having to do any of that back-end data work. You think about what it takes to get Sysmon with an elk stack or even Splunk, and you've got your heartbeat and you've got your configs and you're ingesting all that, and then maybe if you can afford it, I've seen clients with $1 million a month in Splunk log ingestion. So if you get your EDR to get the logs there, you've got your Sysmon, you've got all your configs, you've got your log beats all going. Now you still have to pay for all that data, and you have to set it up with the dashboards and the pre-canned queries. Like this does all that for you. It's all set up, it's all built into Windows, and it all works and plays together. So there's no real reason to not leverage this from a defensive side. And one question we did have come in on the Discord was around the difference between an event and the availability on the graph. Is there any lag between those two? And from my experience, the alerts and the Azure graph is probably the fastest I know of. Even looking at some of the Elastic stuff and doing that across a high availability cluster, you do have the lag between your log ingestion or your log forwarders that then go to your backend, where Elastic is taking that in, doing its analytics and querying, and then pushing that up to whatever Kibana or front-end dashboard you have. This is leveraging a single streamlined pipe to a data lake, probably a Cosmos-backed DB that's taking a lot of this in. And because of how Microsoft is doing this, and because it is their backplane, it is much faster. And I've seen the real-time things be almost instantaneous, where I've seen a delay in hours, sometimes days on other products. So.
Yeah, you covered that pretty well, Tyler. And also, there obviously is lower latency because it's all cloud native, especially if you're ingesting cloud logs like Azure activity logs or Azure resource logs, right? I'd imagine it's probably like quicker than any other third-party solution, just because it doesn't have to send that data outward over a log forwarder or something of that nature. So Sentinel is an extremely highly capable and high powered, and also just there's a ton of benefits that come with using it. And I highly recommend you to go and get started. They do and get your hands there. They do have an 31-day free trial, like free of charge within your Azure account that you can get started with. You could pop up some resources, start playing around with the logs and querying. Some of the other features there, and also there's a sandbox log analytics demo environment where you could practice some of what we're learning here today and get your hands dirty with KQL. So it's easy to get started with. It's a pretty straightforward language, and there's a lot of bells and whistles with Sentinel. So
does it ingest other apps and services and external data sources as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's actually a great segue to our Sentinel environment now. So good point, Tyler. And so here what we have is the landing page for Sentinel. If this were an enterprise environment, there would be some events and alerts here, but this is just my sandbox demo environment. I don't have anything special or exciting going on here. But what I will bring your attention to is the data connectors. And this answers your question, Tyler, on whether or not there's support to ingest logs that are not Microsoft owned or Microsoft logs, right? And so here we have things like AWS S3 logs. You also have CloudTrail logs. You can do Palo Alto logs, Cisco. So there's support not only for Microsoft and Cloud Native Azure Services logging, G Suite. There's a ton here, and they're always improving and increasing the number of data connectors and integrations they have with third-party applications. And today they have 122 connectors. So if I click onto one of these, and let's just do Palo Alto Firewalls, right? This is one that we're probably, a lot of us are probably familiar with. It'll give you like the prerequisites and all of the different configuration steps that you need to go ahead and get started. So how to deploy the syslog agent and things of that, and the exact command. So rather than like having you go fetch for this information, Microsoft has made it fairly easy for you to get started and up and running with your different log sources.
Yeah, and that's just one piece of the puzzle with inside of Sentinel and the data connections. You also have the marketplace and additional runbooks, SOAR, automation, orchestration, all of these things. There's integrations and pre-canned stuff that are already built out for you by vendors and or people contributing. So it becomes much easier to get up to speed and leverage things that people and build off of queries or dashboards or automation that people have already done.
Yep, great points, Tyler. And so just looking at the time here and making sure that we're not falling behind, I'm going to jump over to the logs. This is the same interface that you would see within a log analytics workspace. This is actually the icon for log analytics. And so here you would go ahead and query. I'm not using this environment to show our queries. I'm actually using the Microsoft maintained sandboxed environment. So everything that you'll see in this demo, you could go ahead and reproduce in your own time, and you will probably get similar results, which is pretty fun. Next, I'm going to look into the incidents feature, which again, it allows you to handle and manage an incident through its entire life cycle, from assigning the incident to an analyst, doing investigation, taking notes, triaging. There's also obviously the integration with Azure Logic Apps, which allows you to create playbooks on automated steps to take whenever a specific incident is triggered. Next, you have your workbooks. This is just simple, straightforward visualization of your logs. So for example, if you want a visual of what your Azure AWS network activities look like, you could just enable this template that's already pre-configured with all of the queries that would present this data to you. And there's 116 templates, so it's pretty extensive, and the Microsoft team also continues to add new templates like almost every month, which is impressive. Next, one of my favorite features is the threat hunting feature. They have 210 queries, and they map them to MITRE tactics and techniques, and you could run all of these queries at once if you'd like. I'd imagine it'd be pretty resource intensive, but if you're just baselining your environment and this is the first thing that you're going to do, by all means run these queries. But here you have your different data sources. So you have like your audit logs for on-prem machines, but you'll also have AWS CloudTrail, Azure activities, security events, again for on-prem machines, and other data sources. Now we're going to hop over to this pretty cool map for MITRE. We all love MITRE and the great work that the team has done there, and all of the community members that continue to contribute to MITRE. And so if you look at this map, essentially what it is showing is all of it shows the coverage that the out-of-the-box templates and queries that Microsoft provides. It shows you all of the coverage that it provides across MITRE tactics and techniques, which is super fun to play around with. If there's one that an executive is specifically concerned about, for example, like automated exfiltration or exfiltration over web services, And there's some here that could probably detect exfiltration over DNS or something like that. So next, there's the Content Hub, which I thought this one is a pretty cool feature to showcase. And just quickly going over here for CrowdStrike Falcon, if you click on a vendor solution, say Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, whatever the case may be, they have rules, analytic rules, threat detection rules already written for that service. They also have 2 data connectors, parsers, and automated playbooks, workbooks. They do a lot of the work for you in helping you get started. So again, this is another reason why Sentinel is a pretty cool service. And even if like you're not an enterprise defender yet, and say you're a college student or someone just looking to break into security, if you know if you're getting your hands dirty and you're getting that practice and repetition with Microsoft Sentinel, then I'm pretty sure you're a high ticket target for a lot of organizations today.
And so to summarize some of the very quick, I mean, this is KQL and Azure and a Sentinel kind of primer and crash course in an hour. But to summarize that, you've got KQL, you've got a language that's very ostensible, very easy to use, programmatically integration with .NET right in the interface. It gets data logs and sources that are already there for Azure products. It's got data connectors for any of your other products pre-canned. You can write data sources and ingest packets network, and have pre-canned threat detection workbooks, automation, and flow, all integrated right within inside of there that maps right to MITRE for all of those TTPs that your board is looking for. So very, very full, robust service that is compliant and hooks in to all the products that you need and care about visibility on from an attacker and defense standpoint, as well as doing that very quickly because of how automated and pre-set up a lot of this environment stuff is.
Yep, great overview, Tyler. And so looking at this from like a 10,000 foot view, this kind of encapsulates everything that Tyler and I just spoke about. You have your Azure Sentinel workspace that lives on top of log analytics, and from there you have access to all the features that we just ran through. You have your logic apps, your querying, your threat hunting, etc. But here on the right side, you can see that it also is compatible with a lot of on-prem infrastructure that you may already have. You have AD domain controllers, Windows endpoints, Linux endpoints. You can just deploy an agent or a log collector onto those machines and start ingesting those logs into Sentinel. On the left side, we also have compatibility with different cloud service providers, and you can bring your own threat intel into Sentinel as well for threat hunting and things of that nature. Again, it's pretty versatile as a SIEM. It is a cloud native SIEM, so I wouldn't consider it necessarily like a traditional SIEM. So moving along,
which lends itself to the nice added feature or benefit of maybe outsourcing your managed services or an MSP for a SOC. The managed Sentinel offers that insight without having to give, domain admin, global admin right into all of your tenancies.
Yep. Yeah, and if you're in the MSSP space as a managed service provider, Sentinel is also attractive because they have this feature called Lighthouse, I believe, which allows you to bring in multiple Sentinel workspaces into a single pane of glass without mixing up the data or causing any privacy or security concerns. So again, whether you're just an enterprise defender or you're on the MSSP side, it's worth looking into Sentinel. So now over to the fun stuff, and we're gonna look at and dissect a very basic KQL query. Just 3 lines here. And so what we have in the first line is the table that we're actually looking at requesting data from. So this is the security event table. It essentially just monitors activity within a Windows host machine and records that activity. Obviously, it does take some configuration and enabling on the host machine itself before sending some data off into log analytics in Sentinel. But for now, we're just querying for data across in this table. Here you'll see the pipe operator, which is similar to what the pipe is in a Linux command line type of world. And so essentially what it does, it indicates to the engine that this is the next request or the first request that we're requesting from this table. And so the second line here, I'm looking for events over the past 60 days. You do see a time range filter here, but it's only limited to look back for only 30 days. So if you're looking for something more extensive, you could do 60 days, 9 days, whatever the case. You could do 15 minutes as well, something very fine grained. And in the third line, we're looking for events and fields where the value for that field and that event ID is 4719. So Microsoft uses event IDs to kind of indicate and just a quick way to identify what type of event and activity was conducted. And here 4719 is that a system audit policy was changed on a lower level or a personal user machine. This may not matter as much, but for a domain controller or a critical web server, this is definitely something that you should be monitoring for.
Yeah, definitely one of those things that we've seen very large organizations that have invested millions into their SIM, and they don't have a real fast or easy way to detect whether or not the logs are making it into it or for something like a domain controller or remote host. And then what is the alert in the dashboard? How does that actually get pushed back? So there were many domain controllers that were not pushing logs in for certain event data types, and no one knew it for a year. So that's a problem. You want to be alerted on that. And with 3 lines of code here, barely 3 lines of code, you now have built a very high fidelity alert that if this goes off, there's something wrong that needs to be addressed either from a security standpoint or an operations standpoint, and both are very useful and need to be addressed.
Yep, great point. And so now we're going to dive into actually the different operators and begin understanding the Kql syntax. So here we have all of our key tabular operators, some of my favorites. We just went over the where operator. Now the search operator is a very powerful operator, but not as efficient. And this is because it's looking across all of the log tables in your environment for a specific string. So for example, say you have a fresh piece of threat intel that just comes in, and let's say it's just this IP address here, 172.18.04. You want to look at whether or not there's activity from that IP address within your environment. You can do so using this operator. And so for example, now we have, I'm searching for PowerShell executables. And it looks, as I mentioned, it looks across all tables within your environment. So here we have the VM process table, but also the security event table and several other tables, which is key because now you can see where that IP address or whether or not that IP address has interacted with any of your services or any of your applications. So it's pretty strong, but it is not as efficient when it comes to performance. It may take a little while to get your results. Next is the distinct operator, which is very helpful for just getting, just enumerating the different, the combination of different fields that resulted in an event within that data set, within that table. So for example, here I have my Azure Network Security Group flow logs. And so if I just do a quick search on this over the past 12 hours, this will probably take like a second or two more. But if I'm just looking over the past 12 hours, it'll dump out a ton of fields, probably like over 15 fields, when the flow or the conversation started, what type of flow was it, things of that nature, like the source system. As you can see here, there's over 20 different fields. Which as a analyst or something, I may only be interested in like 4 or 5 fields, and just getting an idea of what type of what are the different types of activities that have occurred. And so here's where I could use the distinct operator to just get the unique combination, every unique combination for these 4 fields, which are the source IP, destination IP, the port, and whether or not that that network flow was allowed by our network security group. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And Tyler, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, that's a great point for being able to, and this is very difficult to do in other systems and even in logging in general, is find that kind of heuristic data for things like data exfiltration, or maybe you have high fidelity indicators of compromise, like the Conti leaks is a great point, like all the ransomware, C2 and bots, all the IP addresses. You can do distincts for any of those on the destination side, or looking for DNS traffic. You can start to begin to do things like averages or counts, where you're evaluating things like A records, like, okay, so a bunch of A records are happening, that's DNS traffic, okay, subdomains of that, that's fine, you're gonna have a ton of subdomains for that. When you have to start doing averages and counts, and you are looking for anomalous things where you have maybe 10,000 subdomains of subdomains, well, instantly you know you've got DNS beaconing. No one else and nothing else does that high count, high fidelity, and so you can begin to very quickly build out these queries to identify that traffic very quickly without all of the extra work.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And also the Azure Network Security Group flow logs, they're an extremely valuable resource if you want to have like that fine-grained visibility into what traffic is coming in and out of your network. Not a lot of organizations are aware that there are network security group flow logs. It is a feature that is enabled through Network Watcher. And so I do encourage you to look into it. There are two versions. One is more extensive and verbose than the other, but for building out use cases to monitor things like data exfiltration and detect that, Network Security Group flow logs is your log that you should definitely be prioritizing. Real quick, I also wanted to bring to your attention, right, that Microsoft Sentinel does cap the output of records at 30,000. So if you want to, so it'll just report back on the 30,000 events, and it'll cap it there. But also here, if you expand on this little window, you could see some insights and metrics about the performance of that query. So you can see that the total CPU and resource, like compute resource that this query took up is this here, and then also age of process data, things of that nature, just to generally get a better understanding of the efficiency and performance of your query. I do have in the reference slide at the end of my deck different best practices that you can leverage to make your query more efficient. And you also, if you're deploying a threat detection rule in production, you want it to be as efficient, as clean, and as quick as possible. And that's where those tips really come into play. So yeah, that was our, yeah.
That net flow and those efficiency tips becomes very important when you start to look at a ton of traffic and you're evaluating, millions and millions of packets over the course of an hour. You do need to kind of figure out those queries and get those efficient, and that's where a lot of the pre-canned stuff comes in and helps. They can build out, and you can look at how they're doing it to do it better, or evaluate why they did it that way so that it was efficient.
Yep. Yeah, and you could also take the pre-canned queries and make them your own and fine-tune them to your environment and build out thresholds and things of that nature. So I just showed you the distinct operator, which just touches on it returns every unique combination that has occurred for those 4 fields, for source IP, destination IP, the destination port, and whether or not that traffic was allowed or not. Now, if I use the summarize operator to get the same type of information, not only do I get every distinct combination or every unique combination of these 4 fields, but I also get the total count in which it occurred. So this is very helpful if you're trying to see how many times did this machine beacon out to a C2 server, for example. This is one way to do that. Or is there a never before seen IP address in my environment, and how often did a server within my environment communicate with that IP address? So you could do that. The summarize operator is very, very useful and versatile. You could do like averages. So if I just do AVG here, Sentinel does include IntelliSense, just as VS Code does. And so here you can just average out the numbers within the parentheses that you add into the parentheses. So
again, very useful for finding data exfil, DNS, identifying things that are going to be very difficult to look at from a a standpoint of like if you're not doing SSL decryption, like flow is probably more useful. Almost all attackers are encrypting the data, you know, inside of the SSL anyway. So they're probably using valid SSL. If you're stripping the SSL, they're probably encrypting whatever data and making it blend in and look like other traffic via malleable profiles or whatever. So the flow and who's talking to who with the averages and the counts and the heuristics pieces is much more useful in identifying malicious traffic and finding that behavior rather than the very nuanced specifics that you're not going to be able to get into without breaking the encryption or whatever of that C2 or exfil.
Yep, and you actually bring up a very good point about embedding malicious traffic in encrypted packets. And Azure actually has, obviously Azure Firewall, but their premium SKU actually has TLS inspection where it decrypts any traffic that's going outbound and checks for any malware. And you can have pretty good insights. You can have those firewall premium logs sent into Sentinel where you could conduct like threat hunting and threat detection using KQL. So there's so many use cases. Obviously, when it comes just to the overall threat detection and security monitoring world, but with KQL and Sentinel, it just makes it so much easier because everything is cloud native, and a lot of your log sources and data sources are in-house. So I also wanted to focus on like the limit operator. If you're just trying to get an idea of what fields this log table outputs, you could just do, for example, sign-in logs, Azure AD sign-in logs. I want to see what it actually, does it say whether or not the user authenticated with MFA, or does it have when they authenticated? And I just want to get an idea of what fields are there. I would use the limit operator, and I would limit it to 5, and I would only get 5 entries returned rather than 30,000 or anything of that nature. It makes it quicker, and it's just pretty straightforward. Then there is the project operator, which you'll probably use a lot as you get started with KQL. And so what the project operator does, it essentially you can dictate what fields or what columns you want outputted into your results. And you could also rename your results. So if there's like some data sources are a little bit wonky when it comes to the data field labeling. And so this allows you to kind of like rename it. And so in this query here, I'm just looking for security events. You can see that there are, again, a ton of different fields and columns. What I can do now is, rather than getting all of this, I want to focus on the tenant ID, the account name, the computer name, and the raw event data, and then also the activity field, which tells us what event ID and describes the actual event ID. So that's a pretty helpful field as well. I'm going to run this over the past 12 hours. It's a quick and dirty search. Again, you can access this environment and all of the data in here and play around with these queries yourself. I'll have the link for this demo environment in the reference slide, so you can get up and running with it as well. All you need is a free trial to Azure, and you could get started with this. So now, as you can see, I just did the project key for these 5 fields, and all it returns is these 5 fields rather than like the 20 fields and columns that were there before.
Yeah, we had a quick question around just a quick detail, like just so they can kind of understand like what's being ingested and how that's being ingested. So for one of the data types, one of the data connectors, can you look at the Azure AD and just show us what the data types are so you can kind of see what data is captured by those connectors? And that'll give you an idea of if you don't know what the connector is doing, if it's going to give you the information you need, you can very quickly look at something like the data types within inside of that connector to evaluate what all is being captured. So here we're looking at Azure Active Directory, and we can look at the different types or data types that are being captured and evaluate if that's going to effectively get what you need for the type of queries you're looking for.
Yeah, and this drill down on what are the different log sources that it's using for Azure Active Directory, which is obviously like one of the most important services. Like security starts at identity, and just seeing how fine-grained and like what type of insights and things it's logging. So it logs like managed service identity logs, service principals, provisioning logs. Provisioning logs actually monitor whether or not someone from Workday has provisioned an account on Workday or ServiceNow and things of that nature. So it's like pretty extensive visibility there as well, and risky users. So say like impossible travel. Someone's in Singapore and 10 minutes later they log in from Rhode Island, right? For example, it'll go ahead and give you that type of visibility. So this connector, you do have to have like a P1 or P2 license, not the free trial, but you can actually, it seems like there is a free trial for P1 or P2. So you can play around with this again, free of charge. Just make sure you turn it off when the trial is over so that you don't get any of those scary bills like I have in the past. Tyler, do you think that answers the question?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So now moving on to the string operators. And so here, what we see is the equals operator, which is essentially looking for an exact match for the NA SQL 12 cache tag account name. And so if there was even just one letter that was lowercase in the actual data table, it wouldn't return that as a result. So for these types of things, we like to use case insensitives for exact matches. And so I'll show now here what we have is the equals tilde, which will show output all of the results with this account name, regardless of the case, whether it's lowercase, a mixture of both, or whatever the case may be. Next, you have the not equals operator. This one's pretty straightforward. It'll just return all of the log entries that do not contain this account name. This is case insensitive. You could also do the tilde and not equals for something that is case insensitive. Next, there's the contains operator, which I showed in the Azure Resource Graph demo. You could do, you're just essentially searching for that string within a field. It doesn't have to be the entire value of that field. It just has to be embedded inside of that field. So it could be like PowerShell.exe, and it'll output that record. This is similar to the search operator that I had showed. That's like quick and dirty, highly powerful, but also not as efficient. But this you actually have to indicate what table and what column you want the query from. Next, we have the ends with operator, which is pretty cool because when we're talking about operation names and operations that can be conducted within Azure, you have to take into consideration the different type of resources and resource types and how Azure displays this in the logs. So for example, if I'm looking at all of the writes within my Azure diagnostic logs, I'll see here, one second. I'll see here that this is Microsoft ASR Analytics, monitoring stats and write. But this could easily be Microsoft.network security groups /write or delete. And so if I want to just look at all the deletes or all the writes, then I would use this ends with rather than having to run through and enumerate all of the different operation names for all the resources and resource types. So this ends with operator is pretty powerful as well. There's also a starts with operator, which just does the inverse of that. And lastly, for our operators and the demo of our operators, we have the in operator, which essentially allows you to create a list of values that you're looking for from your log events and log data. So for the security events, this is a pretty simple example and use case. So that's why I like sticking to the security event table. But we're looking for any events or any log entries that have to do with event ID 4619, 4624, and 4625. So this is what this query does. It just returns all of the log entries that came from these events, 4619. And so if you can think about this, if you're looking for activity across a list of IP addresses or activity across management ports like SSH, And some of the Telnet, for example, when things are very vulnerable ports, you could just make a list of those vulnerable ports and look for any activity over those ports rather than having to do it one by one. It does save you a lot of time.
Yeah, that array, especially for event IDs and ports and even IP addresses, like you again, you take a look at something like the ransomware and Conti, a large list of hosts to identify. So being able to build that array or that string with inside of a set, and then evaluate and filter down lower than that. So you're taking all that data, and then you can filter again, and you can build additional queries on top of that, and further granularly get to the places that you have very, very high fidelity alerting. And that's where the threat hunting piece starts to come in. You can narrow some of this down, build alerts, and then begin to do threat hunting, as well as set it up to identify and build runbooks or workbooks or SOAR events that can quarantine those instantly and build automation. So you don't even have to do any of this after you build the initial stuff. This takes a lot of the work out, and you're making yourself much more efficient and providing value to the organization without additional people and resources and technologies.
Yeah, I think the key word there, Tyler, is efficiency. We always talk about how there's a talent shortage in the security industry, or people that are highly skilled and have spent those years in the trenches doing maybe leading a SOC and things of that nature. Sentinel makes it easy also to save your queries and share your queries with your teammates. So here, if I were to, I'm going to run this query, and then I can save this query. I could save the output of the query. I could make the query private to only me. So next time I start up a session in Sentinel, it'll be presented to me again, or I can share it with the team. So it's highly, it is truly a tool that helps you become more lean and efficient in the SOC. So next, I'm going to cover some very high level or like advanced operators that you can play around with. If you've done like any work with SQL or any work in Splunk, you're familiar with the join operator. Essentially what it does, it merges, especially the join inner, for example, it merges two tables and look for exact matches within a given row of those tables, and then it just outputs those values into the query output. There's join inner, join full, outer, left semi. I'm not gonna act like I know what all of those mean, but I bet there are some very specific use cases where those come in handy. Then there's the external data operator, which allows you to reference and call in data from an external data source, say a CSV file that lives in Azure Blob Storage or Azure Data Lake. So a pretty simple use case for this is you just got a dump of new threat intel, and we'll use like what's going on geopolitically right now between Russia and Ukraine. You get a new list of IP addresses that are targeting American enterprises. You could dump that into a CSV file and just go threat hunting in your environment across your logs using this external data.
Yeah, this is very much like a SQL where you are leveraging a lot of regex. You've got escape characters. It also has a lot of the operands that, like PowerShell, if you're used to querying in PowerShell, or even some of the Linux commands like with Wireshark or packet captures. A lot of this is very, very similar, just with a few nuances and knowing which tables and data you are querying and which operands to use for those.
Exactly. Yeah, and so the KQL is it's similar to SQL, and it's like pretty straightforward. It's insane to me how little amount of people are aware of Sentinel, KQL, Azure Resource Graph, and some of these services that we've been going over. But you did mention regex, which was the point that I wanted to touch on. You can include regex in your queries. I only do it if I have to, because every time I come across regex, I kind of have to relearn it again. I know Joff Thayer, who is one of our co-hosts at Security Weekly, he has a course with Black Hills Information Security for anybody that does want to upskill in regex. It's an extremely powerful parsing language. I highly recommend it. So moving on to the last operator that we'll be covering is the union operator. And this is it's pretty simple and straightforward. What it does, it takes two or more tables say your on-prem Azure Active Directory logs, your on-prem Active Directory logs, and then your Azure Active Directory logs, for example, and it dumps it into one table. So now you have a view of all of your login information and things of that nature across on-prem and in the cloud.
Or something like NetFlow in conjunction with Active Directory logs,
Yep.
where you're trying to correlate those two pieces of data, and that union is super useful for correlation and getting a broader picture of an entire threat instead of just looking at a single table at a time, which may be a single point of visibility.
Right. Yeah. And another example that just came to me is your network security group flow logs with, say, a third-party firewall flow logs or any of the logs that they provide. So it does have a lot of use cases, and also Sentinel has a ton of operators. There's some Boolean stuff which I did not cover. There's a lot there, and I do have a ton of references and resources to get you started and bring you to like full ninja mode with KQL. Just with the time that we have allotted, there's no way that I would cover everything that KQL has to offer. So now it is time to dissect a threat detection rule. And I believe we picked a pretty cool one for this example. And so we are
also a good time to remind everybody that we are going to have that giveaway at the end of this, and we're almost done. So if you haven't joined Discord, securityweekly.com/Discord, go get registered real quick, and you can answer the question right there in our Discord.
Great point. Yeah, and that'll be coming up just shortly, right after we go over this rule. We'll pan over to our trivia question. It's super fun, and you'll be entered to win if you get it right. The first person to get it right, they'll receive that $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. So definitely make sure you're plugged into our Discord server and our Discord channel. So now we're going to jump over to the threat detection use case and rule that I was mentioning, and the one that I ended up going with is the disabling of an audit stream for an Azure DevOps project or pipeline. And Tyler, would you like to talk about a little bit about what are some of the security risks or like the value that this threat detection rule would provide in an enterprise environment?
Yeah, and again, we've seen this in real life, and I have abused this in real life in many organizations where you unhook the logging for very specific hosts or maybe a potential environment network or network segment. So as you're doing that, like that visibility, again, most enterprises do not have easy ways to identify things that are not alerting when they are not ingesting, and that alert and what it does after that becomes very important, because we did have an organization eventually figure out that they weren't getting some alerts for some specific things that we were targeting, but once they realized that, it was already 2 weeks out, and so they didn't have any automated way to identify that and then respond to it. And so by then we were gone, and had already moved off. So having those automation pieces built around this particular alert is very important.
Absolutely, and not to mention the supply chain risk. If your CI/CD pipeline is poisoned, right? There's a lot that can go wrong there, and so we like, this is probably one of the highest value analytic rules that Azure provides out of the box, and it's fairly simple, right? It's only 5 lines of KQL. So essentially here, what we're looking for is the operation within this table for Azure DevOps auditing. We're looking for the operation name that results in audit log.stream disabled by user. And so that's the query that will be running recurringly once you deploy it into your environment. But we can also configure things like, what is the alert name format? In the previous tab, you could have changed the name for this alert. Like if you have a naming convention for all of your threat detection rules within your environment, then you could line it up with that.
Or maybe it's a specific environment like PCI or high side classified or TLP red, like all of those things that could have a label that means something, to start the sirens. Those are important things to kind of add into there.
Yep, any programmatic triggers that another service may be looking for, you could include in the alert details or in the alert name, and that's pretty helpful there. So here it is pretty straightforward, just deciding on how often do we want the query to run and how far back do we want it to look. And so for something like this, you definitely want it running on a daily basis. And the first time you run it, you want to look back as far as possible to see if there's anything detected there. But after you've already ran it once, you want to just look back for that previous day if you're having this run every day. There's also the alert threshold feature, which if you're looking for something a little more benign, say you're trying to detect brute force attempts, on a domain controller or critical account, you wouldn't set the threshold to 0 because that would be fairly noisy. How often do people forget their passwords or just like fat finger their password? You would set the threshold to like 10 failed attempts over the past 30 minutes. And then you can also group all of your events from when this alert has triggered into one alert, and you could dictate how many alerts, obviously with the threshold, how many alerts dictate, how many incidents of this type can dictate an alert. And then there's also ways that you can dictate how many alerts result in an incident. So
that
for
can
something
then,
like
that can then spin off to something like a flow or an automated SOAR or workbook or runbook that does some automated piece, or maybe builds the incident, the ticket, and spins up the team after the device has been quarantined. So the multiple operands here, especially for something like password spraying, where you can do counts over time that do certain things for additional data sets, like super powerful, very hard to do otherwise.
Yep. And so for something like our DevOps auditing and logging being disabled, we want to be notified right away when that happens. We don't even want it to happen once, especially in a production environment. So our threshold will be 0, and anytime there is an instance or this activity is detected in the environment, the alert will sound off. This is what I was kind of talking about, like whether or not this activity can result in an incident which has a heightened, response and a more serious response compared to just like an alert. You actually can assign the incident to an analyst to like dig deeper and investigate what occurred there. There's also like the alert grouping configuration. There's some pretty cool stuff that you could do there. So what Tyler was referring to, right? If I had a playbook, an Azure Logic app playbook, just a generic one, for example, for event and data enrichment, find out who was the user that went ahead and disabled the logs, at what time, what subscription, what other resources may be impacted. That could be a generalized playbook that you could run for all of your incidents, and all your incidents can trigger off. So this is where I would go ahead and add it. And then lastly, I have to go ahead and deploy this field. I'm not gonna go through and do that, but this is just the workflow that you would go through to deploy a threat detection rule, which in Sentinel they're called analytic rules. And I think that just about does it in terms of content. I think now we could jump over to our giveaway, unless Tyler, you have something else to add on this front.
No, I mean, from like we started from the beginning, like gaining this visibility into the cloud. We've already got on-prem, we've got a lot of logs, we've got a lot of things we're doing. This is, as you can see, a very powerful thing that's already ready out of the box, where if you have a hybrid environment, you have a cloud presence, you should be leveraging these different tools and queries, even if you're not using some of the Sentinel tools or the other subscriptions, like the ability to query the data that's already there should be leveraged. Attackers are doing that now, and during my day job at Trimark Security, over there, we look at the cloud environments for Office 365 deployments, and that the amount of places that have very big budgets that look at the visibility, there's a ton of things that we find that would be identified by things like Sentinel-1 or KQL, but people just don't know how to do that, and the visibility or support for the on-prem SIMs just doesn't work well, and they're not gaining those things. So making sure that you're utilizing what you have that's free, and identifying the areas in which you may be able to consolidate and bring something in that is more effective and more efficient is a good use of your time anyway.
And cost less.
And it costs a lot less.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that just about concludes it for this presentation. We do have the giveaway, so definitely do stay. I think these slides are going to be uploaded in the Discord channel and then also in the Security Weekly wiki, so you'll have access to them at some point. No worries on that. And now I'll jump over to our hacker trivia. And the question that we have today for you to win this Hacker Warehouse $100 gift card is: there was a recent vulnerability disclosed, I think just this past week, CVE 2022-08-47. It's the dirty pipe vulnerability. There's a similar CVE from several years ago. There's a CVE with a similar name from several years ago. We would like for you to provide the name, the year that vulnerability was released, and the CVE number for that vulnerability. I'll give.
Ooh, someone already got it. That was
wow.
fast.
Okay.
I'm impressed. Someone can read very fast.
Exactly. Yeah, I did stumble over it a little bit. Awesome. So it is Dirty Cow, and it was released in 2016. Here's the CVE. If you want to learn more about Dirty Pipe, my company Datadog actually just released a blog where they dissected and did a deep dive on the vulnerability and some of its risk and effects, remediations, and things of that nature. You can check out the link on this slide deck. But good job to the person who did answer this one correctly. Sam or someone on the Security Weekly team will reach out to you and find a way to get that gift card in your hands. With that, I did mention I have the resource and reference slide. Here are some of the links and resources that you could use to further your knowledge in the KQL space. There's the query best practices for efficiency and things of that nature. Here's the log analytics environment that I had mentioned that's already pre-populated with all the data, and it's maintained on a day-to-day basis by Microsoft, aka.ms/LA demo, fairly simple. I think the most, the best training that's out there is maintained by Microsoft. It's the Sentinel Ninja training. It's free. It has like 16 chapters. There's also webinars that Microsoft releases on maybe like a monthly basis. Just this year, it's currently March. I think they've released like 4 or 5 webinars just on Sentinel. There's also there's the Must Learn KQL book by Rod Trent, which is constantly being updated and things are being added. That's a very good book. And then there's also the sequel to KQL cheat sheet and the actual KQL cheat sheet that I used to use like on a day-to-day basis for things like case-insensitive operators and things of that nature. And here I just have a list of different Twitter accounts that you should be following if you are interested in this space. With that, I just want to thank everybody for showing up and showing interest in learning KQL and getting your hands dirty. Hopefully you were able to gain a lot of insight and a lot of value from this webcast. Tyler, I'll hand it off to you for any closing words.
Putting all this together, there's a ton of hard work that went into this from Darwin. So really good stuff here from an attacker standpoint. Hopefully there's more of these. We've already been talking about kind of our next iteration of this, the attack and defend using KQL, some offensive techniques and some deeper dives into the defensive techniques that you can leverage to build run books and queries. So look for that in the future. And no, appreciate everyone hanging out. I know it's a little bit past the hour, but it was a lot of info to cover, and hopefully you got something out of it today.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. Johnny, take us away.